The truth about why women humiliate men who truly want them is not a mystery when viewed through the lens of Machiavellian philosophy. At its core, this dynamic is rooted in the brutal realities of power, desire, and perception. Machiavelli teaches that in any relationship, whether personal or political, the one who appears more dependent is seen as weaker and therefore easier to manipulate, ignore, or even degrade. When a man openly desires a woman and shows that he is emotionally invested, he inadvertently hands her a form of control. That control, unless checked by strength, mystery, or indifference, becomes a tool she may use to test, challenge, or even humiliate him. Not because she necessarily enjoys cruelty, but because power must prove itself by exercising dominance. In the absence of challenge, people often push limits. This is not just female behavior, it is human nature. But in romantic dynamics, particularly in modern societies where masculine identity is under constant pressure, this behavior plays out in a unique and sometimes savage way. A man who places a woman on a pedestal, who demonstrates constant availability, excessive affection, or emotional dependence, is seen not as a noble lover, but as someone who has no other options, no higher self-worth. According to Machiavellian, thought appearances are everything. If a man appears to be too available, too eager to please, too willing to sacrifice his dignity for attention or validation, he undermines his own value. The woman may begin to see him as a man she can control, disrespect, or test without consequence. This is not about fairness, it is about perceived power. A woman instinctively tests a man's strength, and the easiest way to do that is to provoke or humiliate him subtly, especially if he shows no resistance. If he continues to chase her, tolerate disrespect, and explain himself, she registers that as weakness. In the Machiavellian sense, once your enemy, or in this case your target, believes you will tolerate anything, you lose leverage entirely. Furthermore, Machiavelli advises to be feared rather than loved, if you cannot be both. In modern relationships, this does not mean being cruel or abusive. It means commanding respect. A man who is respected will rarely be humiliated. But respect is earned not through submission or excessive adoration, but through strategic self-respect, boundaries, and a cold understanding of value. When a woman sees that a man is willing to walk away, that he is not emotionally dependent on her, and that he sees himself as the prize, her behavior changes. She no longer feels the urge to test or humiliate him, because doing so risks losing him, and Machiavelli reminds us that people only truly value what they fear to lose. Men who are genuinely kind, romantic, and vulnerable often misunderstand this dynamic. They believe that their sincerity should be rewarded, but sincerity without power is weakness. Vulnerability without boundaries invites contempt. The man who puts a woman above himself, who waits on her replies, tolerates disrespect, and continues to invest without reciprocation, teaches her that he is beneath her, and what is beneath us, we eventually despise. A woman may not even be fully conscious of this process, but she feels it. She senses the imbalance. The more he gives, the less she values. The more he forgives, the more she pushes. The more he waits, the less urgency she feels. In Machiavellian terms, this is the predictable result of surrendering control. This does not mean a man must be cruel, emotionless, or manipulative, but he must be strategic. He must learn the art of detachment. He must understand that desire must never be louder than self-respect. The moment he begins to orbit her, chase her, beg for affection, or seek her approval, he forfeits his throne. Machiavelli would say, never let the other side know how much they matter to you, especially if they do not demonstrate equal interest. Power must be held in silence, in composure, in the unshakable knowledge that you do not need anyone to complete you. If a woman humiliates a man who loves her, it is often because he has shown her that he would accept even humiliation just to stay near her. That is not love. That is emotional slavery. The antidote is not revenge or bitterness. It is withdrawal. It is silence. It is rebuilding power. A man must understand that he teaches people how to treat him. If he accepts crumbs, he gets crumbs. If he disappears after disrespect, he plants fear. If he stays calm in the face of provocation, he radiates strength. Women are drawn to men who are not shaken easily, who have options, who know their worth. The man who begs becomes invisible. The man who walks away becomes a mystery. In a Machiavellian world, perception is more important than truth. You may be hurt, but you must never appear desperate. You may love her, but you must never worship her. You may want her, but you must always be ready to walk away. This is not cruelty, it is survival. Women are not the enemy, but nature has programmed all of us to test the strength of those around us. A man who passes those tests, who remains calm, composed, and distant when necessary, will not be humiliated. He will be respected. And in the game of power, respect is the only currency that matters. This entire dynamic becomes even more apparent when we examine how women respond to different types of men. A man who maintains mystery, who controls his emotions, and who is selective with his attention will almost always be treated with more reverence and curiosity. Why? Because he cannot be easily read. He cannot be emotionally manipulated. He does not expose his inner world unless the other person has earned that access. According to Machiavelli, revealing too much too soon is a strategic error. It gives your opponent, or in this case your romantic interest, the upper hand. They can then anticipate your moves, exploit your vulnerabilities, and reshape the interaction in their favor. When a man wears his heart on his sleeve without understanding, the consequence is he becomes predictable. And predictability, in the world of desire and dominance, breeds boredom and eventually contempt. Humiliation, in this sense, is not always grand or overt. Often it comes in subtle acts, ignoring messages, laughing at his seriousness, mocking his intentions, using him for validation while pursuing others. These micro-humiliations are tolerated only by men who believe that their patience will eventually be rewarded. But Machiavelli would disagree. He would argue that patience, when perceived as passivity, is a form of weakness. If a woman senses that a man has no threshold, that he will accept anything just to stay in her orbit, she loses respect for him at a cellular level. And once that respect is gone, so too is the possibility of meaningful attraction. Many modern men struggle with this because they've been conditioned to believe that love must be unconditional, that persistence proves worth, and that sacrifice will inspire reciprocation. But relationships are not charity. They are exchanges of value. And value is subjective, but always linked to scarcity, confidence, and independence. A man who truly values himself will not allow a woman or anyone to repeatedly undermine his dignity. He may love deeply, but he will not love blindly. He may desire connection, but he will not sacrifice his principles. He may chase, but only if the chase is mutual. This is the foundation of strategic masculinity. Loving with strength, acting with purpose, and refusing to be emotionally manipulated. Machiavelli would advise men to master the art of controlled detachment. Not coldness for the sake of appearing, strong but calculated emotional discipline. The ability to withhold praise, affection, or attention until it is earned. The wisdom to walk away at the first sign of disrespect. The strength to choose solitude over humiliation. This is not about playing games, it's about protecting your value. In Machiavellian philosophy, the man who controls his emotions controls the game. The man who remains indifferent to insults and immune to flattery cannot be conquered. It's important to note that humiliation often stems from imbalance. When one person has too much power, whether emotional, sexual, or social, they become careless with it. A woman who knows that a man will never leave her no matter how poorly she treats him loses any incentive to behave well. That dynamic breeds toxicity. A Machiavellian man, however, creates balance by remaining unpredictable. He rewards good behavior, punishes disrespect with distance, and never clings to what insults his worth. His presence becomes a privilege, not a guarantee, and in doing so he forces others to rise to his level or be left behind. This approach also applies beyond romantic relationships. In all human interactions, people test your limits. If you set none, you invite abuse. If you Endure disrespect in silence, hoping it will stop on its own. You become a passive participant in your own downfall. Machiavelli teaches that if you are not feared, you will be used. If you are not respected, you will be disregarded. Therefore, you must learn to carry yourself with quiet authority. Speak little, observe more, reward loyalty, reject manipulation. And above all, always maintain the power to walk away. Women do not humiliate every man. They humiliate the man who shows them he will accept it. This is not about blame, but about understanding the mechanics of human psychology. The world does not reward the most loving or the most loyal. It rewards the most strategic. The man who makes his emotional availability too cheap, who invests without return, who continues to plead for affection from someone who withholds it, is not demonstrating love. He is demonstrating desperation. And desperation is repellent. It signals low status, low options, and low value. The key is to shift the frame. You are not chasing her. You are evaluating whether she is worthy of your time, energy, and affection. You are not begging for attention. You are commanding it through presence, power, and restraint. This is not arrogance. It is Machiavellian self-preservation. In a world where emotional weakness is exploited, strength is not optional. It is survival. When you stop showing neediness, when you master the art of calm indifference, when you make it clear that you will never tolerate disrespect, you stop being a man she can humiliate. You become a man she must impress, respect, and admire. And even if that woman walks away, even if you lose the battle, you win the war of self-respect. That is the highest victory. Because in the end, a man who respects himself cannot be humiliated, only tested. And the man who passes the test silently, without complaint, without drama, without fear, becomes untouchable. That is the Machiavellian truth. The deeper you explore Machiavelli's perspective on power dynamics in relationships, the clearer it becomes that the humiliation some men experience is often a symptom of their own failure to grasp the fundamental rules of human interaction. Machiavelli's writings emphasize that all social engagements, including romantic ones, are games of power, strategy, and perception rather than mere exchanges of affection or goodwill. In this framework, emotional dependency is the greatest vulnerability a man can display. It is the opening through which humiliation, manipulation, and control enter. When a man truly wants a woman and reveals this desire without restraint or calculation, he exposes a weakness that is naturally exploited by those who sense it. Women, like any individuals with agency and complexity, are attuned to signals of power and vulnerability. If a man's desire comes across as desperation or neediness, it fundamentally alters the dynamic. Instead of being perceived as a partner or equal, he becomes a subordinate figure. In Machiavellian terms, he becomes a man who can be commanded or disregarded without consequence. This shift in perception encourages behavior that undermines his dignity, sometimes manifesting as humiliation. One must understand that humiliation is not always the result of malicious intent. Often, it is an unconscious test or response to imbalance. If a woman perceives that a man lacks alternatives or is emotionally invested beyond reason, she may unconsciously assert dominance to restore balance in the relationship. This is an evolutionary and psychological response rooted in survival and social hierarchy. The one who is too eager, too available, or too emotionally exposed invites scrutiny and testing. If the man fails these tests by not maintaining his composure or withdrawing when disrespected, the humiliation escalates. Machiavelli's advice would be clear: never allow yourself to be the weaker party in any exchange. Power in relationships is fluid, but must be maintained with deliberate effort. This involves cultivating self-control, strategic patience, and a detached mindset. The man who knows his value and acts accordingly will not fall into the trap of humiliation. Instead, he commands respect through his actions, or importantly, through his willingness to remove himself from harmful situations. Withdrawal is not defeat. It is a demonstration of strength and self-worth. Moreover, this dynamic has profound implications for how men should approach desire and courtship. Showing immediate unconditional desire may seem honest, but it sacrifices the necessary leverage to build mutual respect. Machiavelli understood that love is as much a matter of politics as it is of passion. He would argue that a man must appear less eager than he feels, must keep a portion of himself guarded, and must never surrender his emotional independence. This strategic withholding preserves mystery and power, compelling the woman to invest emotionally rather than simply accepting his devotion without challenge. Humiliation often arises because a man who truly wants a woman sacrifices his own interests and self-respect in the hope of winning her affection. This sacrifice communicates low status, which is the root of the problem. Machiavelli would stress that maintaining power means never showing how much you need someone, because neediness invites exploitation. A man who understands this will prioritize himself and his own emotional equilibrium above any external relationship, making himself less vulnerable to humiliation. This does not mean denying emotions or feigning indifference. Rather, it means mastering the art of emotional regulation, being aware of one's feelings without letting them dictate actions that undermine dignity. The Machiavellian ideal is the man who loves deeply but acts coldly when necessary, who can pursue without desperation, who can give without losing control. This paradoxical balance creates an aura of strength that protects against humiliation. When a man walks away from a situation where he is being humiliated, he reasserts his power and changes the entire narrative. This act of withdrawal forces the other party to reconsider their behavior, because respect, fear, and attraction are often linked to the perception of what can be lost. If a man stands firm and refuses to tolerate humiliation, he sends a clear message. His self-worth is non-negotiable. Women, and indeed all people, respond to such signals. This is the silent language of power that Machiavelli meticulously described. In conclusion, the reason women sometimes humiliate men who truly want them is because those men reveal weakness by showing unrestrained desire and emotional dependence. Machiavelli's philosophy teaches that to avoid humiliation, a man must hold power by mastering himself, maintaining mystery, and demonstrating the willingness to walk away at any moment. The truth is harsh but liberating. Emotional powerlessness invites humiliation, but emotional sovereignty commands respect. Men who internalize this truth, who embody strategic detachment and self-respect, transform not only how others treat them, but how they experience relationships altogether. They no longer suffer humiliation, they transcend it. To delve even further into this truth, it's crucial to recognize that humiliation inflicted by women on men who genuinely desire them is not simply a gendered issue, but rather a reflection of fundamental social and psychological laws that govern human interactions. Machiavelli, in his acute observations on power and control, would argue that every relationship is a battlefield where the balance of power shifts constantly. The man who surrenders his power through overt neediness surrenders his position on this battlefield, thereby inviting contempt, testing, and yes, humiliation. From a Machiavellian viewpoint, the underlying cause of humiliation lies in the man's failure to cultivate an image of strength, autonomy, and control. When a man desperately seeks approval or affection, he projects vulnerability. This projection signals to others that he can be manipulated, that his emotional resources are unlimited and unguarded. For the woman, consciously or unconsciously, this invites a response calibrated to assert dominance. If the man had maintained his composure, withheld too much, and kept his worth unquestionable, humiliation would be far less likely, because she would recognize that the cost of disrespect is too high. Moreover, humiliation often serves as a method to recalibrate the power dynamics. When a woman senses that a man's desire overshadows his dignity, she might humiliate him to remind him of his position in her social hierarchy, to test his limits, or even to provoke a reaction. This reaction is a critical moment. If the man responds with weakness, apologizing excessively, begging for forgiveness, or making excuses, he confirms the perception of low status. If he reacts with calmness, detachment, or withdrawal, he upholds his status and signals that his dignity is inviolable. In today's social context, Where traditional masculine roles have been questioned or diluted, many men find themselves confused about how to navigate these complex power exchanges. The advice Machiavelli offers, rooted in centuries of political realism, applies with even greater urgency. Emotional intelligence alone is not enough. Strategic self-control, emotional discipline, and an understanding of human nature are necessary to maintain power in relationships. The paradox is that true desire must be masked by a facade of indifference or controlled passion. This does not mean the feelings are false, but that their expression must be carefully managed. A man who openly broadcasts his longing forfeits the subtlety required to maintain intrigue and respect. He essentially tells the other person that he is willing to sacrifice everything for their approval. Machiavelli's principle here is clear. Never reveal your full hand too soon. Keep your cards close to your chest and force the other party to earn access to your inner world. When humiliation occurs, it also exposes a man's failure to set boundaries. Boundaries are the invisible lines that protect dignity and signal what is acceptable behavior. Without firm boundaries, a man allows others, women included, to overstep, to push, and to devalue him. Machiavelli would stress that boundaries are not just reactive, but proactive measures of power. By establishing clear limits and enforcing them through consistent behavior, a man maintains control and deters humiliation. Additionally, Machiavelli's writings remind us that the appearance of power often matters more than power itself. A man does not need to dominate or control through force or aggression. He must simply appear unshakable, confident, and independent. This appearance creates a psychological barrier that discourages attempts at humiliation. People tend to avoid confronting those who seem too strong or indifferent because the cost of conflict is high. Conversely, those who appear weak or desperate are targets precisely because their resistance seems futile. This dynamic is amplified in romantic relationships where emotions blur rational judgment. A woman may test a man's boundaries and provoke humiliation not out of malice, but as an unconscious way to gauge his strength and worthiness. If he fails these tests, the relationship deteriorates and humiliation becomes a persistent pattern. If he passes, respect and attraction deepen and the relationship gains a healthier balance. Ultimately, the Machiavellian lesson is clear and uncompromising. Emotional sovereignty is the foundation of dignity. A man who understands this will cultivate the ability to love without losing himself, to desire without desperation, and to engage without surrendering control. He will understand that true power lies in the capacity to walk away at any moment, to detach emotionally when necessary, and to protect his self-respect above all else. This does not mean becoming cold or unfeeling. Rather, it means integrating wisdom with emotion, strategy with passion. The Machiavellian man is not a heartless manipulator, but a master of himself. He knows that the world, especially the world of relationships, is often ruthless and unforgiving. He embraces this reality not with cynicism, but with clear-eyed pragmatism. In sum, the reason women humiliate men who truly want them is because those men have unknowingly ceded power by exposing neediness, lacking boundaries, and failing to project strength. Machiavelli's timeless wisdom instructs men to reclaim their dignity through strategic emotional control, boundary setting, and the willingness to walk away. By embodying these principles, men transform from targets of humiliation into figures of respect and intrigue, securing not only the affection they desire, but more importantly, the self-respect they deserve. To truly grasp why women humiliate men who genuinely desire them through the lens of Machiavelli, one must acknowledge the intricate interplay between perception, power, and self-mastery that governs all human relationships. Machiavelli was not simply concerned with political conquest, but with the universal laws of influence and control that apply equally to the intimate arenas of love and desire. For him, the battlefield is always one of advantage, and those who reveal too much vulnerability hand their advantage to the opposing side, inviting not compassion but contempt and, ultimately, humiliation. A man who truly wants a woman must realize that the very act of exposing his desire is a double-edged sword. Desire is a powerful force, but when displayed without restraint, it becomes a liability rather than a strength. Machiavelli teaches that power is best maintained through a careful balance of presence and absence, engagement and withdrawal, openness and mystery. When a man shows unfiltered longing, he disrupts this balance and signals that his power is diminished. This imbalance encourages the woman to assert control, often through subtle or overt humiliation, as a means of restoring equilibrium in her favor. This phenomenon is amplified by societal expectations and the psychological nature of human beings. Women, like men, are conditioned by cultural narratives and personal experiences to respond to displays of power and weakness in predictable ways. When a man appears too eager or emotionally dependent, he inadvertently lowers his status in the eyes of the woman. This lowered status triggers a cascade of reactions, from condescension to active degradation, as she tests his boundaries and resolve. Machiavelli would argue that these tests are natural mechanisms by which social hierarchies are maintained and negotiated. The key to navigating this treacherous dynamic is self-mastery. Machiavelli's ideal man is one who commands his own emotions. With the same precision, a general commands his troops. He does not allow his feelings to dictate his actions blindly, but exercises calculated restraint. This restraint is not suppression but control, a strategic withholding of emotional availability that preserves mystery and prevents exploitation. It is through this mastery that a man maintains his dignity and thwarts humiliation. Furthermore, humiliation often emerges from a man's inability or unwillingness to enforce his boundaries. Boundaries are the invisible lines that protect one's dignity and communicate what behavior is acceptable. Without them, a man becomes susceptible to manipulation and disrespect. Machiavelli would assert that setting boundaries is an act of power, a declaration that one's worth is not negotiable. When a man enforces these boundaries consistently, he cultivates respect and discourages attempts at humiliation. Another critical element is the perception of alternatives. Machiavelli emphasizes that power comes not only from what one possesses, but also from what one can walk away from. A man who clings desperately to a woman shows a lack of alternatives, signaling scarcity and thus lower value. Conversely, a man who projects independence and abundance of options becomes more desirable and less vulnerable to humiliation because his loss would be significant. This projection creates a psychological barrier that deters disrespect and fosters admiration. It is also important to understand that humiliation, while painful, serves as a form of communication. It signals the imbalance in the relationship and challenges the man to either reclaim his power or accept subjugation. Machiavelli's teachings encourage men to view humiliation not as a personal failure, but as a call to action, a test of character and resolve. The appropriate response is not submission or pleading, but strategic withdrawal and recalibration. In practical terms, this means that men must develop the courage to walk away from situations where their dignity is compromised. Walking away is not defeat. It is a powerful assertion of self-respect and control. It disrupts the expected script of humiliation and forces the other party to reconsider their behavior. This act alone can shift the power dynamic, restoring balance and commanding newfound respect. Moreover, cultivating emotional resilience is essential. Men who internalize Machiavelli's principles learn to detach their self-worth from external validation, thereby immunizing themselves against the sting of humiliation. This emotional independence transforms how they engage in relationships, allowing them to love without losing themselves and to desire without desperation. In essence, the Machiavellian truth about why women humiliate men who truly want them is a mirror reflecting the man's own failure to maintain power and dignity. It is a harsh but liberating realization that love and desire are not simply matters of feeling but arenas of strategic interaction. By mastering the art of self-control, setting unyielding boundaries, projecting abundance, and embracing the power of withdrawal, men can transform humiliation into a catalyst for growth and respect. This transformation elevates a man from a vulnerable supplicant to a sovereign figure, one who commands respect not through dominance or aggression, but through unshakable self-possession. Such a man transcends the cycles of humiliation and longing, becoming a presence that commands admiration and genuine affection. In the end, the greatest victory is not to win another's love through submission, but to win it through strength, strategy, and unwavering self-respect. This is the timeless wisdom Machiavelli imparts to any man willing to understand the brutal realities of desire and power.